Hello and welcome to our VRED 2022 deep dive session. We're going to talk about extended reality today. And for that, I'm going to welcome my colleague Danny Tierney.
Hey, thanks for inviting me, Simon.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I think we have been doing a presentation for the GTC already, where we talked about extended reality by using the VARJO and CloudXR. At the Automotive Innovation Forum, we also talked about XR, and we had many requests about this topic, and so we wanted to share some deep dive information with you today. But before that, just a very quick introduction about who we are. I'm Simon Nagel, I'm working for Autodesk, I'm a technical sales specialist. I had an anniversary this year, so I'm working with VRED for 10 years now, and in general, when not working, also while working right now, I'm located in Munich.
Congratulations, Simon, on your 10-year anniversary.
Thanks, Danny. So, and you are?
Well, yes, I am Danny Tierney. I should know exactly who I am. So I have been working as a technical specialist, sales specialist like Simon, and I've been working in virtual reality or real-time graphics for the past 12 years. You can see how young I was back then. Time has flown since then. And I'm also located in Munich in the south of Germany.
Thanks for that. And today we are going to cover two main topics. One is going to be about the VARJO accessory. I'm going to mainly presenting that, and you, Danny, you're going to talk about CloudXR. And then at the end, we're also going to talk about how to combine those technologies. And that's what we recently did. So recently we met in the Autodesk office, we met in the garage, and we were using those technologies together. So we used extended reality in a headset. We used extended reality in collaboration on multiple headsets. And at the same time, we also used a handheld mobile device, a tablet, and streamed by using CloudXR and a high quality VRED scene to that. And yeah, I think we mentioned it a couple of times. It was a pretty impressive feeling being back in the real world after some month of lockdown. And even combining it with virtual assets and virtual reality at that place was a really challenging project, and we're looking forward to share as many information on how to make this possible and be it.
Yeah, definitely a strange situation where, we were able to see people again, but always great to see colleagues and partners and friends.
So then let's start about the first topic, which is using a head-mounted display in VRED with extended reality. And VARJO was offering the XR3 some time ago, and using this device is really spectacular because it really blurs the boundaries between the reality and virtual reality. And even if you replicate the reality virtually in a high-quality way, you really lose track on where you are. Is it real? Is it virtual? So I tried to record this in one video over here, and this is showing the effect on how you feel when wearing this device, where you have the chance to view the reality, where you have the chance to view the virtual reality, and you have the chance to merge both of this together. And having this is really a spectacular way of working, and I'm looking forward on exploring more about this technology soon. So, but let's start at the beginning. So VRED is supporting this VARJO, the previous VARJO device, the XR3, since 1 year. And it was the first mixed reality headset in VRED. And as always, in VRED, we try to make it as easy and out-of-the-box working as possible. So it's integrated directly into VRED. You just click View, Display, VARJO HMD, and you can use it. It's also working with the default collaboration functions in VRED, so you can collaborate with your peers also out of the box. And of course, we do have multiple use cases of working with such a device. One is, of course, review digital prototypes in real-world environments. This could be a design studio. This could also be any other place which is thinkable of. I think we tried something in front of my house. But in theory, I think one goal could be going at any place with a limited amount of hardware and just review data directly on site everywhere. Another quite important aspect about using extended reality is you are able to see other persons. And this sounds obvious, but if you are used to work in virtual reality, you're used to working with digitized avatars. And of course, this is working pretty good. So it's working in a way that we all accept, and it's really great seeing somebody's movement and behavior directly in VR. But having the real person is still another level. Really seeing the other person, you can see his body language, you can see his face, you can see exactly where he's moving, where he's pointing at. So the communication with persons in VR, and especially also with the persons who are not in VR, is really, it's probably even if it's a game changer. Because even if somebody's sitting at a PC, somebody's just coming into the room, you see immediately who this is and what this person wants. And this is great not to have the disconnect to virtual reality anymore. And of course, we didn't get the chance to try this too much into detail, but another use case is, of course, compare the digital and the virtual world. Compare a prototype, which you have in digital format, and compare it with a real thing side by side to make decisions easier. So, when you want to use the VARJO display, in general, it requires that the VARJO software is installed as well. We wanted to make sure that you have the chance to switch between VR and AMR directly into VRED, and VR and AMR collaboration can take place in the same lighthouse tracking space. So let's just assume you have a VR headset and an XR headset. Of course, you can use both of them together in collaboration, no matter if you're at the same location or if you're at different locations. So the VR Avatar Adaption is also working for mixed reality scenarios. So let's just assume you have a mixed reality collaboration and somebody else from another location joins your collaboration. You can't see his real body. Just doesn't work like that. So the digital representation will work. So seeing this person as an avatar is working fine. And another thing which is great for mixed reality, you can see your hands. So of course, you can still work with controllers, but you can just see your hands, and your hands are tracked, and your hands are even or are not occluded by virtual reality objects, so you can even see your hands in front of virtual reality content, which also helps a lot, not only to navigate in scenes, but also to sense proportion, to sense dimensions directly into that virtual reality scene. So let's go a bit deeper. Let's just say you want to use an XR3 in VRED. What you need to do. The first thing is you need a capable computer. And the hardware requirements are listed from VARJO on their website. And they are, well, I would say they are not the bottom edge, so they are kind of high end. So you need a premium 8-core CPU or higher. You need to have access to a high quality graphic card. The memory on your PC must be sufficient, and you need some display ports also on your PC, which I really appreciate from VARJO that compared to the XR1, they changed the plugs. So right now we just need two USB-A 3.0 or 3.1 USB ports. It used to be Thunderbolt before, and it was quite challenging to get a system running with Thunderbolt.
Just a quick interruption. Sorry, Simon. In general, I would say it's not the worst idea to contact VARJO to just check the specifications, because it's not the most complicated computer setup in the world, but it's always it's nice to be safe rather than regret a purchasing decision.
Yeah, exactly. But we got it running, so we found a workstation which has all those specs. And afterwards it was possible for us to continue. And then we installed the software, so you can go to your VARJO account at the VARJO homepage, and you can download the VARJO base software. You also need a VARJO subscription, which is also different to probably some time ago. So you need a subscription of VARJO to run the VARJO base in relation to your headset that you purchased. And of course, make sure to have the correct Windows 10 version, that you have the latest Nvidia GPU driver. And for tracking with Steam VR, you also should make sure to install Steam VR on your system. There are some additional SDKs that could be installed. For example, an SDK for Ultra Leap, because you know that the VARJO XR3 has a leap motion technology integrated, which is capable of doing the hand tracking for you. And for using it with VRED, we recommend please do not install the Ultra Leap SDK for VARJO. Otherwise, it won't work to use hand tracking in VRED. So please do not install this Ultra Leap SDK. Just install the VARJO base, just install VRED, and hand tracking will work. Also, besides that, there's nothing special which needs to be installed. The VARJO base is fully sufficient. The firmware update can be installed, but usually it comes automatically when connecting your VARJO to your system, your XR3 to your system, and you can check the newest firmware updates. So then you can open the VARJO software, which is this one. You have a lot of functionality in there, which can change things in the VARJO itself. So you can go to set up your workspace, you can set up your system tracking, you can pair Steam VR devices. But in the end, for just making it work, not much is required. Technically, just make sure that you open the VARJO base, you log into your account, you connect the headset, and afterwards you should directly see an image in your VARJO based software. When you put the headset onto your head, you should you should see your hands. You should also see a digital representation of your hands. When you move it around, the head tracking should work. And once you are able to see the hand tracking working in the VARJO, you can be sure that it's also working in general. So it also should work in VRED. In terms of tracking, and I have it open here on my system, you can choose either Steam VR or VARJO Inside Out tracking, which is there as a beta version. So if you don't have lighthouses around you, you can still use the Inside Out tracking, which was working surprisingly well. However, if you want to have a controlled system and you probably want to work with trackers, if you want to work with multiple persons at the same time, then of course Steam tracking, the lighthouse tracking, is working a lot better. I did not work with the Steam VR room setup, didn't do that. I technically was doing an override later on. I'm going to show this in a couple minutes. So I did not prepare anything in advance. I technically just used the default settings here and went then on to VRED. Also for this in the support settings, you can check this out here. If there's a new VARJO version, you can do a manual update if you have a special version that you want to install. In the system settings, there's also nothing which we needed. We don't need the chroma key because we didn't work with a green screen. With the markers, we're going to talk later about that. The virtual workspace is technically a representation of your desktop, also of your computer monitor, which you can see also in the VARJO headset. And there are also some other functions which are probably not relevant when you just start working with the software. Just one thing before we go to VRED. In the analytics window, you can open this up and you also can do your screen recordings and you can see a bunch more information. So if you want to record on what you're doing in the VARJO, it's probably better going to the analytics window. And in that analytics window, you are able to define what you want to record and what not. Okay, so we're all set. We are ready to go. And we can go further. So in VRED, we have, those devices supported. We're supporting the XR1, which is the last generation, and the XR3 of VRED. And the main differentiation is that in the XR3, we are also supporting hand tracking and gestures in mixed reality. Both devices support the depth estimation, so a sense on how far your real body is away from your glasses, and occludes your real body or not if virtual reality objects are closer or not. And also those markers, which can be printed out, we're going to cover them later, are also supported in both versions. So, going to VRED. nice thing in VRED is it's really working out of the box. So technically you just go to View, Display, and then VARJO HMD, and it's working. You can see it right away. You can experience mixed reality right away. If this is grayed out like here, just make sure that VARJO base is running and that the VARJO is really plugged into your computer. But in general, if you see a VARJO image in here in your VARJO base, don't have one connected right now for the deep dive, but if you see an image right here, you also should see it working in VRED. No other preparation needed. So, however, if you go to if you use the VARJO, it's a mixed reality headset or an extended reality headset, and in VRED we have two modes. One is called one is called VR, which is just virtual, and one is MR. And MR means I can see the real world, and I can see the virtual reality at the same time. So what VRED needs from you is in your preferences, where you can choose if your default mode is supposed to be MR or VR. That's something you can define in advance. So the depth estimation is also something which you can turn on and turn off in your preferences. So it sets the default states for your real world hands in mixed reality. When enabled, it detects your real world, it detects the depth of it, and afterwards you can either define, do you want to see your hands in front of your virtual objects or not. We can see it here in this presentation. We have a screenshot here. The hand estimation is on, and here it is off. And you can see here's also the icon for that in XR to turn this on and off. And you see, of course, the advantages. You can see your hands. The downside is, well, the quality of the LiDAR detection. Well, I think there probably is still some room for improvement around the edges. That it looks a little bit grainy and blurry, but nevertheless, it's great just to see your hands and being able to interact with your surrounding. There's also a setting in the VARJO settings which is called Foveated Rendering. And this requires eye tracking in the VARJO base to be enabled. And here you can set the default state on how things in the peripheral view are rendered. You know, the VARJO has two displays, one small one in the middle and one peripheral display around. And so the quality of the peripheral display will be worse when activating foveated rendering, and only better in those areas where your eyes are looking to. So in this scenario, you can optimize your performances, and especially where you have compute intensive materials, or when you're using a lot of anti-aliasing. Please note, making a change here, you can't see it immediately. You have to restart the VARJO image. So go to Display, View, Standard View, Display, View, VARJO HMD. See it. If you change it, go back to Standard View, and then start the View, Display, VARJO HMD mode again.
Simon, just to ask you a quick question, if it's unclear, so the foveated rendering is a static foveated rendering, so it's concentrated on the bionic display, I think it's called, the higher resolution display in the center of the VARJO, and the eye tracking setting for the VARJO is mainly used to just see what you're looking at. It doesn't move the bionic display, so it's not a, like an active foveated rendering. However, I think the eye tracking is very useful for when you're doing HMI tests to see where the user is actually looking when they're using something, like clicking on a digital display or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for making that clear. So let's talk about using the VARJO XR3 in VRED in VR. Well, you might ask now, well, it's an XR headset, why should I use it in VR? Well, the reason is simple, the quality is just insane. And sometimes there is value of just hide your real world and just look at it really in focus in virtual reality. And by having a bigger field of view and a higher pixel density, better resolution, it's also an awesome display of just using it in virtual reality. And for that, all you have to do is you can go to the settings in VRED, and start VR. But there's also a functionality in the VARJO itself, and we can see it here in this video. So you have buttons on your HMD. You have buttons right here, and with those buttons you can also open up menus, and then with the automated hand tracking you can just switch between the application, between the real world view, and between the workplace view of the VARJO. So you can also switch between applications directly with that menu. And that's how you can experience the VARJO in VR. So immediately you can see your VRED scene. You can take a look at the blue hand that you know since some years already. But the great difference is that your hands are now your real hands. They are tracked. So the hand tracking is used, and the position of your hands and your fingers is really detected, and the movement is as instantly. So you really have a great hand tracking immediately. And besides that, also gestures are detected, and of course functionalities like touch sensitive objects and VRED are also working. So when we talk about gestures, if we make the gesture by opening the palm on the left hand and then touching it with your index finger, with your right hand for example, you are opening the VRED menu. See that, right? So I can just click on my palm and then the menu is opening, and then I can just easily interact with my menu by just clicking on it. And then I, for example, can go to my variant sets menu, which automatically appears, and then I can touch the menus. So be a bit careful not to touch it too heavily. I need to really go smooth in there and just touch the button precisely. And I can do the same thing for scrolling or going back to other menus. So hand gesture, open menu, click somewhere, execute it. Out of the box function. There is also a hand gesture for teleporting, and in this case we are touching the back of our hand, and then we can see the teleport icon on the floor. We can rotate it by rotating our hand, so it's the same behavior that we have before. And to get to another position we have to touch our thumb and our index finger together. So we have kind of to make this pinch movement here, and afterwards we can automatically move to another position. Here we go, you see that. So just open the teleport, move somewhere, execute it, and you're moving in this, which is quite handy to teleport in VR. The third out-of-the-box functionality is laser pointing. So when I look at my three fingers here, which is a German 3, so if I look at my three fingers with my palm facing to my head, I can see a ray, and afterwards I can position this ray to any position in VRED. And afterwards I can execute a function by again pinching my fingers together, so I can execute, for example, touch sensors which are away from me. And of course, talking about touch sensors, I mean, you've seen it already, I can touch my menu. So whenever I do have touch sensors in my scene, and you know that they're working in VRED with controllers and in VR already, so now I can just go there, can touch them, and they are executed automatically without any extra preparation. So as long as there's a touch sensor available in VRED, I can just execute it and see the action.
I think it's worthy to say, or worthy to mention at least, that okay, for physical objects that animate, it's very helpful. But again, going back to the human-machine interface, if you're able to use your tracked hands to skip a track or use your navigation system for a touchscreen, I think that's an incredible technology as well, and it's working quite well too.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was VR. So I think the main values of the headset in the newest version is that you have a higher quality, and at the same time that you have access to your hands. You can see your hands, hand tracking is working with this new gesture movement. So you are controller free now in the new version of VRED with the headset. But, well, of course, it's an extended reality headset. So let's take a look on MR, on mixed reality. And for that, there are a couple of things you need to know. So whenever you access the headset in MR, so if the default mode is MR, and you go to view display VARJO HMD, the VR hands will not be visible. You see it here, blue hands. However, if you click on MR, well, the blue hands disappear, because there's no point of having blue hands. You want to see your real hands, right? And these real hands still are tracked in the background. So I have the virtual representation of my hands in the background. So I can still execute touch sensors. I can still execute the menu. So all these functionalities are still working. Also make sure that when working in collaboration, avatars will not be visible in mixed reality. So billboards on top are visible, but not the avatars themselves. Yeah, that's kind of obvious, because if I see the real person, there's no point of having an avatar on top. You can turn on teleporting in MR, but is it useful? So why would you teleport somewhere in VR? You can, but navigating this way is really challenging because your surrounding doesn't change. So you would teleport in the virtual world, but not in the real world, which is a bit confusing for the head.
Essentially,
so for that we integrate.
Essentially, you'd just be moving the model rather than anything else, right? And I think that's a little bit confusing. And there was just one point I wanted to clarify, Simon, just for people who don't know what the billboard is. I know you're going to show it later in the presentation. But just it's instead of having avatar representation in mixed reality, you can have the name as text for the users. I think you've seen it in the video that we showed at the very start.
Good point.
Yeah,
that's a billboard, exactly. So usually it belongs to the avatar, but in this case it can be still reused to make sure that the tracking is working correctly, but also to understand who is wearing which device.
Very useful for collaboration, for sure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So we would recommend not to teleport, but instead you can use a place tool, which is a new tool which is integrated into that menu. And by using that tool, you can move predefined objects in your scene to different positions. So rather use the objects and not change the surrounding. And that has a very simple reason. Because usually when you want to work in MR, you would like to have real-world context, like real-world reflections, for example, or real-world lighting, and so on. So when teleporting, you're changing your perspective, or the virtual perspective, to the surrounding, to the lighting of the surrounding. So teleport isn't really ideal to use. Move the objects, don't move the surrounding. And you might have seen that the VR menu is slightly different when being in MR and being in VR. You can also see this here. We have other functionalities available. Of course, the icon is changing from VR to MR. So you will notice that when switching from VR to MR. So I just said it. When you work with MR, it makes sense to match it with the real world, because the biggest value of XR is that you can see and use the real world, and you want to see your virtual objects into real world context. So get as many informations from the real world into your scene to make a perfect immersion. So how can you do that? And that's where we're gonna go on here. Well, usually in computer graphics, you need to have some kind of reference of the real world. And usually we're using a 360 environment photography. In best case, it's in high dynamic range. It's an HDR. With lots of informations about the image brightness and contrasts. And we did the same here. So we took a picture with Ricoh Theta Z1 camera, which is an easy process, takes a minute. And afterwards we have an HDR image that we can use and that we can put into VRED. And looking at VRED right now, here we go. That's my VRED scene, and that's the HDR of my scene. And it's good already. It's a great start. I can work with that, and I get good reflections of my objects that I position in my scene. However, if you want to make it perfect, we really have to be careful about dimensions, because how does your real world know where your virtual world is? And how does your virtual world know where your real world is? And for that, it's really important to work precisely. So when you take a picture, you usually put your camera onto a tripod and you take that picture. So please just document where this tripod was positioned. Maybe on your floor, just make a short cross, take a meter and really memorize the height on where the image was taken. and also make sure that the angle of the camera is more or less parallel or perpendicular to the walls of your room, that you really know, okay, in this dimension the image was taken. Don't just take a random picture somewhere, really align it to the room as good as possible and document the position. What we also did in advance was, it's optional, you don't necessarily have to do it, but to be precise, I would say it's a better workflow. So in this case, I was scanning my room. And when you scan your room, we see it here in VRED directly, when you scan your room, you get a better feedback of your geometries. So I don't think that everybody has a professional scanning equipment at home, but it was quite straightforward. I just use my iPad, and there's a LiDAR scanner on the iPad, and there are plenty apps around there, called 3D scanner or so on, and just walk around with your iPad in your room. Just walk around for like 2 minutes, and afterwards you get some data out, and you can export this data as an OBJ, as an STL, as an FBX, and send this data back into VRED. And that's what I did over here. So that's a scan of my room. It's quite highly tessellated, but I don't need to take a look on the tessellation. But for me it was great because I had a precise representation in 3D. So I really knew what were the distances, and I also knew where did I take my HDR in relation to the 3D scan. So the first thing I did after importing the scan is I aligned it to my axis. Because, usually, where's my grid, by the way? Just give me a second. Here's my grid. So I made sure that I more or less moved the geometry that I imported, that it was aligned to my axis. So I think originally it came in like this. And obviously, for the sake of working as precise as possible, I need to make sure that the rotation axis of my room are perpendicular to X, Y, and Z of my scene. After I did that, I needed to define, what's the 0 point of my scene? I need a 0 point. I mean, 1 point has to be 0, 0, 0. In the end, it can be any point, but I chose a point which is easy to reach for me. So probably just right here on the floor, right next to me, in the center of the room. And it should also be a point where I can easily position my headset for calibration. So I chose this point to be my 0 point. So afterwards, all I needed to do was to move around my geometry to the exact position that it was fitting my 0 point. Afterwards, I took my texture, my HDR, that I used, this one here, and I also went to the material editor settings and went to my HDR environment material, and in the transformation settings here, I could align it to my scene. And that's why I said earlier why this offset is so important. So let's just say I memorized the position where I took the HDR, and I know the 0 point of my room. I can do the measurement and more or less know what the offset of my HDR is in relation to that 0 point. If possible, of course, you could also take an HDR exactly on top of that 0 point, and then you just make an offset of 1 meter or so. I didn't do that, but it also could be a way of working. And of course, make sure that the rotation is correct. Otherwise, you will have some strange offsets in your scene. So if you have something like this, then obviously it will never match to your room. So you need to make sure that the matching is okay. And afterwards, if I take a look onto my geometry, I was pretty satisfied on how well this was working. So when applying the texture to it, it was working pretty good, especially from that perspective when looking at it. So right now I'm looking at the geometries, but at the same time I have the correct texture applied. So it really felt quite realistic into the scene.
Very,
And
very. It's a cool workflow, I have to say. But I think the way that you're describing it, I don't think it is as time consuming as it sounds. I mean, you're describing it in great detail, step by step. And some people might say, well, I can see that there's slight little hiccups in the scan, but we have to remember that it's not a professional scan. It's done with an iPad. Obviously, if you invest either more time or more money in a better piece of hardware kit, you're going to get much more accurate and reproducible results. But for what it is, it's a cool use case. And that's, I've always said this to you, it's really difficult for me to understand that slide where you move between VR and MR, because you don't know which mode you're in. And that's what we always talk about, of blurring the lines between the physical and the virtual. I think you've really achieved that there. It's very, very impressive.
Yeah, I mean, it's a totally fair point. Of course, if I zoom to that perspective, it doesn't look correct. That's not really usable for high quality. But we shouldn't forget two things. I mean, I just need this for reflections and for representations and for really positioning objects precisely in my scene. Usually in an ideal scenario, I would never use it. I would never see it. However, even though the quality is not perfect, I was using it in that video that we have seen earlier on, which we can see here again. And in that video, I'm using exactly that geometry. And even in that short length of video, we don't really understand which one is VR and which one is not. So, well, again, it's not perfect, but just for the sake of time and the sake of effort, it's a workflow which is, I think, quite straightforward and very helpful to start. So, after we did this in VR, and we really make sure that the matching is working as good as possible. And for that, we need to use that slide. We need to use that 0 point. And as you have seen, I have defined a 0 point in my virtual reality scene in relation to my real world. So in my real world, I was putting a marker on the floor and said, I want this to be my 0 point on the floor. The characteristics for that 0 point was, as I said, it's, well, in the center of the room. I can reach it quite well. And it's something which I can easily use in both worlds, and which is on the floor at the same time. So I needed to make sure that the 0 point is in the virtual world, but how to set the relation to the real world. And for that, that's the workflow that we did. So if you have your scene set up in VR, you can go to the VARJO HMD, and right now VRED is starting in the VARJO headset. So right now that's the view through my headset in VRED. And afterwards, I need to go to my camera module in VRED, and I need to select my perspective camera, and I need to change my values for translation to 0, 0, 0, and for rotation to 90, 0, 0, because it's a setup system with a camera. That's why the 90 degrees here. So make sure that you have 0, 0, 0, 90, 0, 0, and afterwards there is no offset of your HMD in VRED. And afterwards, what you should do is you should really take your headset, move your headset, and put it exactly on the marked position on the floor. And we don't have it in this. Yeah, here, so really put it exactly in this position here on the floor. Here we can see it. So it's the same physical position. Put it there with the headset facing in the, what is the direction? Sorry if I have to look this up. With facing into positive Y. Okay, so the green arrow is positive Y. So you need to position your headset in the real world exactly to that position. Here we go. And afterwards you can go to the VARJO settings, and you can go to System, and there's a button which is called Override Origin and Direction. If you activate this button, then the current position of the VARJO will be taken as a 0, 0, 0 position for your Steam VR tracking. Okay? And in that scenario, you can be sure that the VARJO in VRED will exactly be at 0, 0, 0. This is your real world position, which is also the real world 0, 0, 0 position because you chose to. And then VRED we made is a setup also. So put it to the correct position and choose Systems, Override Origin and Direction. And now you can see this is my VRED view. This is my VRED view. This is my real world view, and it is matching very, very close. So, well, it's still a manual process. Keep it in mind. So I don't adjust it to the millimeter. The more precise you work, the better. But it's working good enough to have, I would say, an approximation from reality to virtual reality by, I don't know, 2 centimeters, maybe an angle of 2 to 3 degrees. But in my scenario, and then the setup that we used in the Autodesk garage, it was working very well. And I would say that probably for many use cases, for many XR use cases, it's totally fine. Just putting it somewhere, press a calibration button, and off you go. And here we can see what's happening. So right now I'm in the VARJO and completely in VR. That's my VR tracking. We have seen this in VR and VRED a couple minutes ago. And I can always just switch with the VARJO settings to my real world view. And right now I can see the real world directly in my VARJO application. I can see my computer screen. And I have a matching of the real and the virtual world. So there are settings, and we talked about this depth estimation already, and depth estimation is working great for your hands in relation to objects, but it's technically working for all objects which are close by. And this is quite impressive because you can really interact with your room. So if you have the VRED menu open on your hands, you can move it around and you can make it disappear in your table, for example, in your walls. It can interact with furniture, and it's working quite well. When I used it the first time, I was disappointed because all my objects disappeared, but this was just simply due to the fact that my room is quite small, and I was looking at a car, and no car would fit in that room. So usually the cars were always outside the room, and so with the depth estimation, I was not able to see cars at all. So I needed to scale them down to see them in my scene.
So the solution for that, Simon, was just to maybe open your window and stick your head out the window because it would be floating in the air.
Probably, or just get a bigger house.
A bigger house, yeah. Or a design studio where they're actually meant to be.
Yeah, so there are a couple options on the table. And just as a recommendation, and I think that's also quite obvious, always work with the newest VARJO-based version, because of course the interplay between VRED and VARJO is constantly improved. And so also the depth estimation and the quality here is improved in newer versions. So another example of depth estimation, here we can see it again. And of course, if we switch from MR to VR again, we still have a similar effect. And there, of course, we do not need the depth estimation, because in VR we have virtual hands, and the calculation of virtual hands too. Virtual objects is a lot easier to do. So there are those markers. So you can work with those markers in VRED and with VARJO in VRED and using the XR3. So for that you can go to account.varjo.com/downloads and go to the developer portal if you have hopefully access. And there you can search for some markers. Click on them, and you can look at them. They're small, medium, and large markers, depending on which size they're supposed to be tracked. I chose medium, which are working fine until 1 meter. I downloaded them, and afterwards you can print them out. Makes sense to use thick paper, so strong paper, so that they're not wobbly like this, and they're working. And also make sure that you document the number under each marker. So this marker has a number 200. This is 201, 202, and so on, because this number is important when you make the connection with VRED. In VRED, what you need to do is open your scene tags, create one scene tag called VARJO markers, and create one scene tag for each marker with a name. For example, for the marker 200, you create a scene tag called 200. For the marker with the number 300, you create a scene tag called 300. And afterwards, you should make sure that your node has 0 transformation. So in this example, I'm creating a subgroup where I put the Aviera in. and afterwards I'm gonna drag and drop the geometry to 1, my marker, my VARJO marker scene tag that is recognized, that's supposed to move, and 2 to my marker where I want the Aviera to move with. Afterwards, if I'm working with those tags, and if I activate the tag tracking in the settings, I will see the movements of the tracks in VRED, which is working right here. So here in my hands I have a tracker enabled. I'm moving around that tracker, and then you can see that my car is moving with my tracker. So you see that it's working without any additional information. So you always have the information from the QR code in relation to my headset, and the tracking is working. It's okay. I think it's unfair to compare it like with an optical based tracking system, but still it's doing the job okay. Here we go. If the tracker is moved, there's also a movement with it. If you want to improve the tracking quality, you can work with the confiance. So you can make the confiance in the settings higher or lower. So if you make it lower, then, well, the system deems that the detected result is 100% incorrect. And if you make it higher, the system deems the detected result to be 100% perfect. So in general, if you have a lower confidence value, well, then your object seems to be jumping around because it's not that accurate, but at least you are tracking it. If you make it to 100%, then the tracking will be super accurate, but maybe it will not even detect it at all, because then the tracking will not be detected in a good way. So probably 80 or 90 is a good compromise between finding the tracker, making the tracker working at all, but also tolerating some mistakes for the tracking to work.
Simon, may I just ask you a quick question about a use case for multiple trackers, if you don't mind? Would it be, so I did see some shaking there, I'll be completely honest. Is it more thought of that you would have multiple vehicles or objects in the scene and you would use the marker to position them around your physical world? So let's say you had comparison automobiles against real ones and you wanted to place them in a big hall 10 meters apart from each other or 5 meters apart or whatever. Is that the kind of idea as a static marker?
Yeah, I think could be a great use case of just using them to define a position in space. If you want to put an object on the table, under the table, 2 meters away, for those some markers are working pretty well. And as we also have a Python integration and a Python connection to those markers, you of course can specify and customize your use case when working with multiple markers together. So I think there are some different use cases and potentials for using the markers.
Thanks.
So yeah, before handing over to you, Danny, we also showed this in our GTC presentation, but I think it's also interesting to look beyond out-of-the-box functionalities. And we just noticed a couple of things when working with a device. And one thing which is great, you can see the real world. You can see your screen. You can see your surrounding. So you can work in VRED while wearing the headset, which I think is just incredible. If you want to do some minor changes, you can do it on the fly. Don't have to put the headset down. Don't have to communicate. You can just do it. Also, if you're working with scripts, for example, positioning nodes somewhere or drawing somewhere, it's also just working right away. And also that you can add information to real-world scenarios, I think is also something which can be used. So you can even make documentation on your real-world objects, and you're not limited to the virtual world. You can work with your menu directly in your real-world context. So I think all of you know the default theme from VRED. You can move objects. So we moved these cubes on our set to hide some, well, not really cleaned up places. And of course, we could just sketch around and try around to work with this technology and draw in the air on how to evaluate how well the car should be positioned before actually positioning it in the scene.
Yeah, I think this 3D markup, 3D annotation stuff is extremely powerful. I don't think your sketching skills really highlight that too well. It's not a critique. And even with the jokes aside, like putting the thumbs down on Florian's back, I mean, to be able to put these on a clay model that's overlaid with virtual augmented content, so for a perceived quality check on something like that, or just to be able to document where changes could potentially be made, and then export those annotations or those sketches or those notes out for review is it's a great use case. And we're not saying, again, as we always state, clay is here to stay. We're not trying to get rid of clay. We're just trying to bolster and, excuse the pun, augment the workflow so that it's more complete and you can commit to better, more thought out designs than if you were to find a mistake later after committing to the physical too early.
Yeah, and also additionally to that, we also noticed that working with other devices is possible. So, for example, you can check your phone, you can check the mails on your phone, you can check comparison imagery on your phone, and you can also work with the VRED app on your scene. And this you can just easily configure your car just by using an already existing technology by accessing your VRED scene with your phone. And not to forget, also, if you want to work in collaboration, if you want to move objects, if you want to show specific things to other things, it's also to other persons. It's quite impressive on how easy it is to move virtual reality objects while seeing the real world. So, how to work in collaboration? I mean, technically, it's nothing different to what you would do in non-collaboration. You just should do it in two computers at the same time. So you need to make sure that you have your virtual reality scene set up with the 0 point. You should make sure that you have your 0 point also in the real world. Afterwards, you can start the collaboration session. You can start connecting to the VARJO on both systems. You can set your camera perspective translation to 000, 9000. And afterwards, you position your camera directly on the floor at the same position and press override origin and direction on each device. And afterwards, it's working. That's technically it. Afterwards, you are working in VRED collaboration together, and you can see the billboard on top of your colleague. You can see your virtual object, and you can see your real world surrounding. And as mentioned already, it is really impressive to see your colleague in a collaboration, and also to see the person who's also sitting behind the PC at the same time. Whenever somebody else was entering the room, if somebody else was entering the garage, you immediately know who this person was. You could always understand, is the person in VR really focusing to me? Is he talking to me? Is he showing something to me? So I think there's a tremendous value of really seeing a real world person in comparison in relation to your virtual reality scene.
And thank you, Simon, for a great technical demonstration of how to set up virtual reality, mixed reality with the VARJO XR3. So I've introduced myself already. I'm not going to bore you with those details again, but the CloudXR installation requirements are the first things I'm going to go through, without which you can't really do much. So apologies for some of the technicals here. We will go into a lot more visual stuff later, and I'll show you the kind of jaw-dropping quality that we can achieve with this application. So the first thing that you would want to do is apply for the SDK with Nvidia. My contact who I have at Nvidia is Gregory Jones, so you can get a developer account. The graphical processing units, so the GPUs or graphics cards, should be from the Pascal generation or later. We would of course recommend RTX or the Ampere generation, simply for performance, from a performance perspective. Windows 10 is supported, and Windows 2016 Server. The Microsoft DirectX SDK from June 10th Like with the VARJO Steam VR, the Nvidia driver is quite important here. So you need the 440.97 or later. And for we'd separate it up into the server and the client. So I'll just explain very quickly what the server is. The server is the computer on which you render, and the client is the mobile device on which you stream CloudXR to. So the client, in this case, I tested with Android. It's also, since CloudXR 2.1, Apple iOS is officially supported. Now, I did try it out, but I would recommend it just to wait a little bit until it becomes a little bit more usable. Maybe I was doing something wrong with the setup, but we can go into a deep dive with that later once we're happy with the capabilities of it. The mobile devices on the client side were first a Samsung Galaxy S8, and then we used a Samsung Tab S7. So the reason why we moved to the Tab was it's a lot more up to date, and I did have some transparency issues, which I might go into later. I had some transparency issues with the S8. A 5 gigahertz wired network for streaming to the client and the device, and potentially, depending on where you are available, where you are in the world, and if it's available, a 5G network, so you could have completely wireless streaming to the device, and then you need the AOR core for Android, and likewise, if you're using it for iOS on an iPad, you need the AOR kit. So just some of the key components. On the left hand side you have the server, as I stated before, and the right hand side you have your CloudXR client. Now on the left hand side, what you are doing is you're rendering essentially, and you're sending that render information to the CloudXR client, which is then taking into account the position rotation using the gyroscope from your let's call it the Samsung tablet, and then sending it back. So it's sending these pretty complex bits of information, so that's why the network itself is quite important, so you don't get any jitter or latency or artifacting. When you actually get the SDK, you will get a package which contains a client, a dock, an installer, a sample, and some testing tools. And within these, I think it's we don't need to go into this too much, but if we look at the setup of the client, there are various different build essentials within that. And of course the guide is pretty easy to follow. It's just a PDF, and it sets up every scenario. So if you were actually to stream to an Oculus headset or anything else, it will show you exactly how to do that. So the binaries for the server and the client are located within the CloudXR 2.1 setup. And then the SDK contents. For us, the most important one would be the Google AOR. So this AOR minus sample.apk, which would have to be installed on your client device, so the Android tablet. You can see iOS has a slightly different type of application where you have to build an Xcode project using an Apple, a Mac laptop or device. And then the test device, before you start anything with VRED, then you just want to test that the connection has been successful. And it's kind of a trippy little .exe where you've got all of these colored boxes floating around your house if you successfully connect to the AOR. So the first thing is setting it up. The first thing you want to do is set up your server. You want to configure your home router to have a 5 gigahertz wireless LAN connection, so wired into the server but wireless out to the client. Then you will need to install SteamVR on the server. At first there will be no head-mounted display detected, because you probably haven't plugged in your VARJO or your HTC Vive or whatever it might be. But don't worry about that. That's completely normal because we're going to establish a connection using what's called CXR, which is going to replace the HMD device. So basically, you're replacing your head-mounted display and using the mobile device or tablet instead.
So for your server, I think for the scenario, you just used a regular PC mainly. I think it was just a workstation. So, but ideally it could also be decentralized. It could also be an instance in the cloud, for example. So server technically just means computer.
It's a computer, exactly. Of course, the wired setup that we use in Germany is because, well, the simple fact is we don't really have 5G networks here. So it's a lot more reliable. If you imagine the scenario that we did in the underground garage, Simon, where we would have had to have a mobile connection 2 stories underground, that simply wouldn't have worked on a mobile network. So yeah, there are a couple of things that you have to consider, but all in all, yeah, it's just a computer that you're using when we call it a server, either centralized or decentralized. Yeah, so the next thing is you will run the cloud -XR setup. I always, when I'm installing things like this, I always run it as admin just to be safe, just because you never know. Then you will select to install the server component onto the server or the computer, as Simon correctly mentioned. A firewall port will then automatically open to establish a CloudXR session. Now, you may need to have some sort of admin rights to be able to turn off some of these firewall blockers, let's say, but that's something you'll have to establish internally from the IT. So once that is done, SteamVR should launch automatically when it's complete, the installation. If not, just manually launch it. So to establish the connection and connect the CXR device, as you can see the logo to the bottom left, it's no longer the standard head-mounted display visual representation. It's got this cool CXR symbol, but to establish that connection, it needs to be loaded onto the mobile device. So you've done the server already, now you want to do the client, and I'm going to show you where that is. So within the SDK package, you will see an AOR-sample.apk. I mentioned this before. If you were doing the iOS one, it would be an X project, but that's a different story altogether. Now I connected it, I just downloaded it or uploaded it to Google Drive and then downloaded it directly onto the Samsung tablet. And this is how you would do it. So again, first thing, you need to connect to your 5 gigahertz wireless network. And now you're going to set up, you're going to launch AOR Core from the mobile device, like so. This is you connecting to your 5 gigahertz network. So it's already connected.
And really make sure that you're using your 5 gigahertz network and not your 2.4 gigahertz network. Otherwise it will not work.
Technically it should work, but you're going to have performance issues for sure.
Yeah.
So you're just installing this here, and the first thing you do, you will need to put in the IP address of your server. As you'll see here, when you do it the first time, you may need to enter it twice. I think that's a feature rather than a bug. But once you've done that, then you won't have to put it in. And after I've put in the correct IP address, then we should establish a connection. And this is where you scan the surface where you want to place the model on. So you'll see this kind of network, this net spider web. And once you do that, you press in the center of the screen exactly where you want to place the model and its definition of the 0 point. And then the next step will be it will establish a connection. So now your SteamVR interface will glow green with the CXR symbol. And then on the mobile device, you will see this kind of waiting room that you would see in SteamVR when you have no application running apart from SteamVR itself. And I think for the calibration, Simon, when we were doing this, we set that 0 point to the exact same 0 point that you used for taking the HDR image and for calibrating the VARJO. Isn't that correct?
Yeah.
So you've got to...
And the good thing is you also can change that 0 point later on. So once the tracking is established, you can move it around in the room. So the room is scanned, and by just clicking with your finger onto the tablet, you can change the 0 point. So even if you do it wrong in the first place, you can just rechange it by pressing with your finger onto that device.
Correct. Cool. So then we move into VRED. I mean, you've established the connection. It's like establishing a connection with any head-mounted display, just very, very slightly different. Start VRED. Load your preferred scene, whatever that might be. And to achieve background transparency, i.e. you want the virtual background replaced with the real world, then you would just turn off the visibility of the environment node in your VRED scene graph. Then you go to View, Display, OpenView or HMD, and as you do this, similar to the VARJO XR3, you would set all your camera translations to 0, and that should place your object perfectly on the ground. However, you may need to adjust your rotation slightly, because there will be some slight offsets, and then the Z value of the camera, because sometimes it will have a little offset to it. So when you actually go down with what I do is I bring the tablet down onto the ground, and I take a reference point like the front or rear wheel, and I put a little physical sticker on the ground, and then place the wheel directly on that. And if I move the camera or the actual device around that point, and it starts swimming left and right or floating over it, then it means I either have to raise or lower my Z value for the camera. It's a little bit of trial and error there. And this was the first series of results that myself and Simon did, I guess, a long time ago. And you've probably seen some of this already, but this is using the Samsung Galaxy S8, and then very, very simple experimentation with this, and nothing really that productive or something that you could take into industry, but certainly shows, you know, I think this is the well-known example that a lot of people have seen, and it's hard to differentiate between what's real and what's not, and that's of course the goal. So we just created some cool lighting scenario. We put a real car in there to kind of mess with the heads of people who wouldn't be able to tell the difference between what's real and what's not real. So I think for a first attempt, it was promising, but also a lot of fun. Of course, we're not here to have fun. You may have noticed from that previous image that there was no reflections based on the environment, i.e. my home office attic. So it's a very, very similar process to the XR3. In fact, it's identical. So we would shoot at a HDR on location and add it as a spherical environment to VRED. And one thing you need to make sure is that when you do this, that the ratio of the image is 2:1, otherwise it will not be read correctly in VRED. And the camera is the exact same camera that we use as this Theta, where we created 11 images, so 8-bit images of different image brightness and values, and then combine them in Photoshop to generate a 32-bit EXOR or high dynamic range image. And for the garage scene, we thought, okay, we might as well go big or go home. So we got a professional photographer in, and instead of using the Theta camera, we got a digital SLR. So Marcus Hartman from Fujitsu, we give you another shout out for the great image quality of that. And then we did some scalability tests, and we combined them with the real reflection of the environment and really tried to push it. So we showed this at the Nvidia GTC before, and this is 18 cars, over 500 million polygons with the real-time reflections, but in OpenGL. Let's be very, very clear about that. So it's running on a single graphics card, and that seems to be no problem whatsoever to stream over. I think that's pretty cool. The next thing, and this is one of the areas where I will just highlight the difference between, so you can actually see in this image here, you can see the floorboards through the actual geometry of the cars. And that's what I meant about the transparency issues I was having. So this is, however, full global illumination. And this is recorded. Actually, I made a mistake in the presentation. It's not on the Tab S7. It's on the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus. So we did have some flickering in the image, but considering we're running, a few hundred million polygons here, unique cars, not clones, and you can see the real-time reflections and real-time global illumination based on the lighting and based on the geometry and the physical properties of the materials. I think that's it's a pretty exclusive piece of demonstration here.
Yeah, especially thinking this a little bit further, where you have the device handheld somewhere and the calculation power is not in your room but somewhere else.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
technically it's just easy to scale up quality that you can see on any device anywhere, and just scale it up with the amount of render resources that you might need, if you need it. I mean, maybe you're also happy with just a very low quality rendering on one machine, but you can easily scale it up to as many machines as you want.
Yeah, I think, Simon, you did intensive tests with scalability on cloud, and I think we have that available on the VRED YouTube channel somewhere. So that's a very interesting look and analysis that Simon did for scaling up. So this is our old office, the garage that was empty at the time due to everybody being in home office like we are today. And this is an incredibly detailed and well-produced image. Again, big shout out to Marcus for creating this for this demonstration. So this is filmed over the shoulder. This shot here using the Galaxy Tab and CloudXR streamed onto this device, and this is an actual screenshot. So there are a lot of commonalities between what Simon presented at the start, because we had a collaboration session between the two XR3s from VARJO and then one CloudXR device. So that's me standing with the tablet. So, I mean, VRED doesn't care what kind of display it is, if it's a Powerwall, a cave, a head-mounted display, an extended reality device, or streamed to a tablet. It's really flexible, and you can do a collaboration session with every one of those devices. And I think just the perspective is incredible. The way that you can view this vehicle, and when you drop the tablet down and actually look to the empty space, you kind of have the sense of, oh right, well, it's not actually there. And that's the goal. I think that's the key to establishing believability, and people being able to make informed decisions based on high quality, physically correct or interactive content. And then we took it one further, and we took a customer data set. So these are our friends and colleagues, customers in Weissach in Germany, just outside of Stuttgart. And I think a lot of people will recognize this car. It's, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful and desirable EVs, at least in Europe. And this is what we did. So we just replaced the other demo cars that we had, the GCC and the Genesis. And the exact same functionality, and it's very, very quickly changed. Then we took it outside to a location in Munich, blocked off a parking spot, and shot another HDR image to get a completely different sense of this incredible vehicle. And I think, being able to evaluate a vehicle in different lighting scenarios, in different real world scenarios, is it's just so valuable. Animations are working as normal within VRED, out of the box, extremely high fidelity images and quality.
And the beauty also was that there was no additional preparation time, so the data was ready, it was prepared from Porsche. So we used the scene last year for the GPU ray tracing demo that we showed, and we just put it into the extended reality demo, and as the lighting from the garage was created as an HDR, we could just put it in there, had nothing, no extra work, and it was just working out of the box, which was also quite impressive for us on how easy extended reality it can also take advantage of VRED technology.
Yeah, and no compromise, by the way, no optimization whatsoever. It's the data set that we got from Porsche itself. So there's no fumbling around and optimizing things to run on the device, and I think that's a real time saver. We'd rather let the graphics cards do their work and save us time from doing manual data prep to get it running on a less sufficient device. And then
it's kind of combining both of it together. So thanks, Danny, for explaining about how our CloudXR can be used. And at the beginning, we were showing this video and we're showing a kind of a summary of the XR3 being used in combination with CloudXR. And we hope that we covered all the questions which were popping up. If the question still occurs, how did you match the VARJO and the CloudXR? It's all about the 0 point. In the end, we have the same VRED scene opening on all sessions. We should make sure that collaboration is running between the sessions, so we can just name our collaboration users different, like Danny uses CloudXR and Florian is XR3 and so on. But that's pretty much it. Afterwards, you just need to make sure that the calibration is working correctly, which we have shown how to use it in VRED with the XR3. And Danny, you've shown it on how to use it with the CloudXR. Move around the tablet, choose your 0 point, click on it, and then you need to do some manual rotation in VRED to adjust the rotation Z axis. And afterwards, you have set up an extended reality collaboration with multiple devices and perfect quality.
Yeah. Brilliant. So, well, I think that's the end of our session now. I would certainly say thanks for your attention and your time. I will say greetings from a very hot, humid and sweaty Munich. It's extremely warm. I think myself and Simon are in the same situation in terms of being in home office in the attic at the very top of the house. But regardless of the sweatiness, I would say thank you so much. Thanks to my colleague Simon and everybody who supported our project and our work, and hopefully we will get to see you, our customers, our friends, colleagues, at some stage over the next few months, face to face and in person. From me, I would say thank you very much and have a wonderful summer's evening.
Same for me. Thanks, Danny, for these great words. If you have any questions for Mark, just put it in the comments, and let's talk soon. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. Bye now.